Welcome to the Focus on Why podcast. I'm Amy Rowlandson and I ask my guests one simple question. Why? Focusing on the importance of why, I share with you the relatable, uplifting and inspiring conversations I have with people from all walks of life. This podcast will encourage you to focus on your why to enable and empower you to achieve the success you desire. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we start, I would like to draw your attention to what I can offer you as a master coach. I can help you to focus on your why with clarity, uniting your passion with your purpose with a plan to create the life you truly desire. Book a free 20-minute coaching call right now via calendly.com/Amy Rowlandson/call, and we can take it from there. Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Charlotte Mannion. Charlotte, welcome.
Oh, thank you, indeed.
And someone might recognise the name. So any relation perhaps to a previous guest?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm afraid, yes. The airline pilot that you interviewed some time ago now, the podcast. Yes, he's my husband and he wanted me to meet you. And this is why we're together today.
Tell me a bit more.
What about Cyril?
No, we've done Cyril.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tell me more about yourself, Charlotte. What is it that you're doing?
My background has always been in learning and development, and I was a coach and facilitator for many years in my own business. So I really have always got an enormous amount out of seeing people learn and encouraging them to learn. So my major push has always been is that as an adult, you know the answers to everything. My job is simply to help you to find them and to facilitate them. So it's been a really interesting career, and I've worked both in the voluntary sector and in business, in right into corporate world. And it's the same issues that are required, really, is to help people to just be normal and natural, communicate in English, write in English and not in book words, as somebody once said to me, and try and get that kind of openness and freedom. So that's what I did. And now I'm bringing that into my voluntary work because I've retired. And so did 7 years as the chair of a local college, board of governors. Fascinating situation. I've been teaching people how to chair meetings for a long time. And suddenly I was in there having to actually do it. So again, that wonderful opportunity that volunteering gives you, that allows you to use skills that you've got that you might not have in any work environment, the opportunity to use them. So I did 7 years of that, and now I'm a chair of trustees of a small charity. And again, very involved, using everything that I've learned over the years to actually develop volunteers now.
Tell me what retirement actually means from your definition.
It's a good question, because when I did retire, it took me a long time to retire because I was still good at what I was doing. I was still enjoying going out, particularly in workshops, running workshops. And it was things like being a bit tired of the prep, but still loving being in the room full of participants. And I think then travel got me down. And I had got to the point where I'd say, okay, yes, I'll come up to London and I'll run this workshop, but I want first class travel. I don't want to sit in the back of the train. I just need a bit of comfort. And it was, as I was doing that, I was thinking, really, I'm just shaping this job around my requirements. So retirement meant giving up. It felt terribly much as if I was giving up everything and what I was known for. And so I needed to fill that. And I'm trying to think, I think part of that is because I can't do anything that I'm not fully committed to. So, for example, over the years, I've joined CIPD and I had to run their local events. I was a member of another group. I had to to be involved in the committee. I can't just be a member of something. And of course, this is my great fear when I retired, was that I'd suddenly just be me, nothing to do. So I think, yeah, in terms of your question about what retirement means, I think it means that you realise that all you're doing is transferring your work skills into a different environment. And although it took me a long time to do it, I was 71 or 2, I was still doing workshops. So I gave up then. And now, of course, all of that goes back into voluntary work, and I'm still as busy as ever.
And it's so interesting because that transition of identity is what you know we're talking about here, essentially, is giving up everything that you were doing and that you were known for. So how did you manage that from a perspective? Because clearly you're still very active, both in the immediacy, but in a volunteering space. And I don't mean but in a volunteer, as in an unpaid role, as opposed to being paid, still using the same skills, still using all of those amazing qualities that you've gathered over the time. That identity shift, as you said, took you a while to understand and navigate. What's the difference?
I think that it's a good question. I keep saying this, but I really think it's recognizing you don't need money. So even if you know, I'm lucky. We've already mentioned that I also have a husband who brings in, has an income as well. So I can choose not to work for money. But I think a lot of people can choose not to work for money if they want to. And one of the biggest learning for me really was when somebody once said to me, well, it's terrible, isn't it, looking after volunteers? You know, they're very difficult to manage because they're not employees. And I suddenly thought, why are we using money? As you know, because I'm not paying these people, therefore I can't manage them very well. And why do we think that money is more important? So the biggest difference, I'd say, is, you know, I'm working harder probably now and doing more exciting things than I ever did as a paid person. And it doesn't matter because, so that I'm trying to say that's the difference between being paid to do something and doing it because you get an enormous amount of pleasure. And if I say to volunteers, well, I always say to volunteers when they come to join us in the charity, and I always say, what are you going to get out of this? And they go, oh, I want to give something back to the community. And I said, well, I'm not interested in what you want to give back. I'm actually interested in what you're going to get. And so eventually you can draw it out of them. And it can be very practical things. Well, I'd like to practice my English, right the way through to, I need a routine in my life. And, you know, since I've retired, I don't get up in the mornings. And so those things are what makes a volunteer want to continue to volunteer, because I bought it because I'm getting a routine. And we've got young people who haven't got jobs who are using it as a showcase to see the things they can do. And then they will go on and get jobs. And we've had 2 successes in the last month. Sadly, we've lost two good volunteers, but they've managed to land jobs. And that's because they've been able to showcase their working skills. So volunteering is, I think everybody would benefit from it. But what they must do is say, I'm getting something out of it from me. And if it's not for me, then there's no point. Same as an employee. If you're employing somebody and they say, oh, I'm only doing the job because you're paying me, well, they're not going to last long in your company, are they? Because somebody else is going to offer them a bit more money. But if they say, well, actually, I want to tackle a big project, or I want to try and achieve success, or I want to develop myself or get more qualifications, all of these are good things. And these are the things that will make people stay with you as an employee.
And it's been proven through various studies, and I'm referring to, I think it was Daniel Pink in his Drive book, that he talks about how people actually performed better when they were doing it from an intrinsically led desire, as opposed to this reward led, external, extrinsic motivation. And that's essentially what you're talking about here is that motivation that is coming from within. And let me just check. Are you
Yeah,
right?
yes,
You agree with
that's
that?
entirely it. I
Okay.
think people forget that they've done surveys and things, haven't they? And managers always think that their staff work for money, and the staff always think their managers work for money, and neither group actually works because it's money. They work for a lot of money, and they like the things that money buys. I'm not degrading, but you could say, I'm doing this job because I want to have 3 holidays a year. And that's the thing that's going to keep me in this job, because you're paying me around enough money and giving me enough time off to have those holidays. So, yeah, it's about what you get out of it.
Absolutely. So from that perspective, what I'm linking this to is the purpose and the why piece that I talk about often in the podcast. I go into more detail in the book that's coming out later this year. But it's a case of you don't find your why, you create it and feel it from within. And this is where the confusion often arises, is that people are always thinking about, how do I find my why? And purpose is this overarching intention that guides your direction in life. And it's whatever you choose it to be. And your why is the emotional significance that you assign to that purpose. So building into what you've just said, how you are intrinsically driven to do the work, and you wanted to understand what it is they get. It is that significance that you're looking for.
Yes, I would think so. I think people do know. It's just that our society says, what do you do for a living? They don't say, how do you fill your day? So it is very much about people assuming they must say something about themselves. Well, I earn my living doing this, and I fit in the bit where I look after my children and manage my husband and manage my home and all of those things, as if they're not really very important. And I think it's to do with the way we've always been. It's people saying they don't want to retire because they don't exist after retirement. And clearly they do, but they don't. They've been taught to say it's because I'm a fitter. I've been taught to say I'm a plumber. I've been taught to say I'm an electrician. I've been taught to say I'm a trainer or a facilitator or an academic. I've never been brought up to say, I'm doing this because I love doing it, or I'm getting a lot from it, or they're benefiting hugely from my input, whatever it is. We haven't got that label in the same way. So if you say to somebody you're a volunteer, they go, that's nice. But it hasn't got that same thing. So I love to have a society and I always did look for that on recruitment, is where people said they had interesting interests and asides. And if somebody said, I volunteer for whatever, you go, right, you're okay, because you're already understanding the need to do more than just work for a living.
And it's interesting, isn't it? These labels that we put on ourselves and we put on others. And it's the reason why I always start the podcast here is, what is it you're focusing on? It's not what are you doing or, what do you do for a living? It's what is it you're focusing on? Giving you the freedom to answer that question in whichever way you want it to be.
Indeed. Yeah, it is that.
So you said you found the transition difficult from moving into that different identity, and it is a societal led expectation that the process is you get education, you then go into employment, and then you retire, and that's the sort of route. Not so much anymore. It has, I mean, you've seen over the decades how this has shifted.
Oh, yes.
And how there's so many more options. How has that evolved for you and what you're doing now?
I think the only thing I would ever say out of it is I wish I'd done this 20 years before. So, yeah, you do see the decades moving on and the changes. I can remember still getting wildly excited when I first found a fax machine and the office got one in, and I thought, nobody is ever going to get better than this. And that was, I'd be hard pushed to find one now if anybody knew what they were. But I am aware that everything keeps changing. And one of the things that annoys me is when I have friends of my age saying, oh, I'm no good with these phones, or I'm no good with iPads, and oh, I can't manage internet. And I just think, of course you can. What's wrong with you? Of course you can, because just because you haven't had a lot of practice like your 16-year-old grandchild who actually can teach you how to do it, or you think, oh, it can only be done by 16-year-olds. So therefore, I can't do it. And that to me is heartbreaking. So every time a new program comes out or another thing is happening, I'm in there trying to learn it, trying to do it, make a complete screw up of often, Luckily, I have a son who does understand IT, who comes in every now and again and rescues my programs or from whatever. But I'm not going to sit back and say, I can't work it. And I do go on Twitter, and I do use Facebook, and I use all the other social media posts and programs, simply because I'm not going to be left behind. I want to be able to do it. And I think that makes a big difference between, as you started by saying about how things have changed through the decades, is I think the most important thing I'd say to anybody, it doesn't matter whether you're working or not, is you keep up with them. Don't just sit back and say, I can't do this anymore. I had my daughter-in-law's grandmother died quite recently. She was just coming up to her 102nd birthday. She lived alone independently, although I thought it was very admirable. I was assured by my my daughter-in-law's parents that it was quite annoying. They had to keep an eye on her and all the rest of it. Now, she was on Facebook up to a week before she died. She would respond to all the family's photos. She would put messages up. And after she died and her son advertised her funeral, if you like, put on her Facebook page, she died. We were amazed at the number of friends who'd never met her, but she had befriended. And she had this lovely group of people who were people that she talked to and shared photos of the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. And it was for her a very useful thing. So it can be done, and people do it. It's just that it's kind of, you've just got to go with believing there's always a future, believing there's always more to go to, I think.
And with a background in this professional learning and development that you've had, it's easy for you to come from this perspective because it's just part of who you are, Charlotte. Mm-hmm. And when you see other people who have these limiting beliefs and are very much a case of defeatist attitude that they bring to their approaches of new technology and things. I can't do that. Well, of course you can't do that because that's what you're saying. So you're not going to be able to. That's just going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy there. So with this understanding of wishing you'd retired 20 years sooner than you did, and what is it you would love to do with the time that you have left on this fabulous planet?
Oh, well, I would like to continue as I am. Very much involved with charity work at the moment. It's one of those awful things as a trustee, is that you're supposed to just do 3 years or 4 years. In our case, it's 3 years, and then you can renew for another 3 years. And you suddenly see, oh my goodness, I actually might be out of this. They might push me out for legal reasons. So yeah, I've got to continue to think of other things that I would concentrate on. So at the moment, I decided I'm going to write a book, and that's going to be about how we develop the charity and what's involved, but with lots of anecdotes and stories, and hopefully sell it and raise money for the charities. So that's my next plan, I think. What else have I got in? Oh yes, the other thing is we were talking a lot with my family, who only live, my son and daughter-in-law and their children live just 2 or 3 miles away. And we're talking to them about extending our house, maybe looking at multi-generational living, still steps to take, but it's quite exciting looking at all the prospects and the possibilities. But again, times have changed. My son has suddenly got to find another £500 a month for his mortgage. And we're sitting here in a big house. So, we've got to look along those lines, but there are all kinds of legal issues and whatever. So yeah, my head is still going busily trying to solve the next situation. And I used to be famous at work because they used to say I got 100 ideas a week of what we could do. And that was the problem, really. I would come up with an idea. If somebody didn't pick it up and run with it, then I get another idea. So I'm having to fill in some of my own gaps now. That's the difference.
Yeah, I love that. And writing a book, what a fabulous idea that you've got there in terms of also ensuring you don't write it in book English.
Yes.
So you'll be writing it
Conversation.
in very much conversation. Well, you said you were going to include anecdotes, so that makes perfect sense. You also mentioned openness and freedom with that book English when you were talking about how to write and things. Would you consider those values or approaches?
Oh, gosh, I've never thought of it like that. I think it is to do with one's values, having the openness to say things. I've always felt it was important if you make mistakes and things is to just say you've made a mistake. So it's about being open. It's not trying to cover things up and things. So that's definitely a value of mine. Freedom, yeah. Freedom's much more tricky because one person's freedom may not be another's. So I'm not sure yeah, but I do believe in the right to protest, the right to express yourself, all of those things that are entwined in our society at the moment. And I think everybody should have that freedom to be able to respect others, but also respect themselves and not hide behind it.
Freedom is such an individual word. Whenever I speak with people on the podcast, freedom tends to come with something else. And it's either a freedom to or a freedom with or a freedom from. What is that freedom linked to? I know you just mentioned something, but I didn't know.
Yes, I would say it's definitely freedom to rather than freedom from, sort of a person. So the freedom to be able to well, let's just say the freedom to be able to sit here and have this lovely conversation with you. That's one thing that, a lot of people don't get that opportunity. The freedom to be able to work when I want to take advantage of the lovely weather, just stop doing what I'm doing indoors and go outside. Those are those small, simple freedoms. But those are good enough for me at this stage in my life or my career, is to have that kind of the freedom to do what I want to do that will not affect or hurt other people. It's important.
And I want to just to dive into that. I know we don't do regret in life as futile, but the wishing you had retired 20 years sooner, what would you have done differently had you retired 20 years sooner? And I'm thinking from the perspective of advocating that to others who are thinking potentially, what does it mean? What would retirement look like?
It's a difficult question to answer because a lot of what I learned in those years that I was working, I am now using. So I think in some ways I'm saying I wish life was longer. That I thought, the average time for getting old would be 90s, 100s, that kind of thing. So therefore that wouldn't be. In terms of your point about advocating to others to do it, I would say definitely stop and think about why. Now, you mentioned, I think when we were talking earlier about books that have had an influence on us, my daughter gave me a book called When Work Doesn't Work Anymore. And it's an American book, and I tried to look for it this afternoon, but it is around, I can look it up. But it tended to sort of say, I mean, it was important to me at that time because I had a boss that I didn't get on with who I felt, it just made working rather unpleasant and uncomfortable. It was a difficult time. And so I started to look in those terms of when work doesn't work. And there are lots of practical things like, you don't need to buy suits anymore. You don't have to prance about in high-heeled shoes. Greatest thing to give up is high-heeled shoes, I think, if I was advising, obviously, people who wear high-heeled shoes. But I think I didn't leave thinking, oh, I've got lots of skills I can now use somewhere else. So I didn't realize how much I had probably until I did. So I think you just got to look at it and say, am I working and I'm getting pleasure from working? And it's really giving me what I want, which is recognition or achievement or any of those good things. And if it isn't doing that, then stop and think, well, where could I get that recognition or achievement? And it might not be in paid employment. And so therefore you might stop sooner. I didn't stop to think about it.
And that's stopping to think. And I've just checked the book. It's When Work Doesn't Work Anymore, Women, Work and Identity, which is an interesting subtitle, right? So yeah, so the author is Elizabeth Pearl McKenna, and there's another author, Liz Pearl. Yeah, brilliant. So the reason I just looked that up is it does look at the effect of many women's lives and what then goes on. And it really is interesting, this challenging of the status quo, this reevaluation of what really matters. And if you don't stop to do that, you do get swept up. We've already spoken about how easy it is to be swept up with the societal expectations of our identities, our labels, and what happens there. But it's also dreams and aspirations. So it's not just a case of living and working in London here, where I was. We were swept up with the other parents of our of children the same age as us, and then peers, and you just see everybody else living this life, and you think, well, everyone else is doing it, so it's the norm. It must be that we're just not doing it as well. And goodness, why are we not managing this life-work balance well? Or looking in deeper, I think that a lot of people aren't managing it, and you are actually living other people's lives. So it's a really key point, that stopping to think.
Yeah, it is. It's an extraordinary coincidence at the moment. I walk home from school after I dropped my granddaughter into school, and I walk back with a friend called Catherine. She's a child psychologist, and she told me today as we walk back that she's actually stopped working at the moment, and she feels very guilty, but she just, because she's a child psychologist, she was going into schools doing intervention work with children, SEND children with special needs. And she said the schools really didn't have the facility, the funding wasn't there for them, the parents' lack of interest, all kinds of things are happening. And she just thought she was just getting really in a bad place. So she stopped. And now she feels guilty but she's got twins of 5 and a 7-year-old. So I said, just enjoy being, there's so much to do while she's, while the children are in school, and she can walk back and forward with them. But I think there is still that guilt thing that women have, is that despite the fact that she's brought 3 beautiful children into the world, she still feels she ought to be working somewhere else and doing something else. So in terms of what we've talked about this afternoon, that's a really good example of women identifying as a child psychologist and not identifying as a mother.
That's a really interesting point. I'm a qualified one of many women's coach, and what we look at is the paradigms that we have been led to or have built into our lives as women, and that the workplace paradigm, the familial paradigm, the cultural one, and these all have these different layers of what expectations are on us. And I absolutely was led to believe that we could do and have it all and step into this superwoman role, only to see that it's led to burnout. It's led to all sorts of, as you say, guilt from so many different perspectives. And even when you get into a different space and you move or transition into a different life stage, it doesn't go away, unless you address it and you take that time out to think and really give yourself that space. But ultimately be kinder to, and really nurture the roles that you're playing. And this is what I'm hearing from you, is that this ability to now really recognize what you're getting, what you're giving, of course, as part of the trustee work that you're doing, but what you're getting from that. And that, we're so, mother role is can easily go into a martyr perspective. You know, you can become over expressed in that
Yes,
area.
yes, you can. I mean, I've happily moved on thanks to my children growing up, so I no longer. But again, I think having the second opportunity, if you like, I have 5 grandchildren now, and I've been assured by both my daughter-in-law and my daughter that's the number I'm getting, no more. But I can help and support them, but at the same time also enjoy their company. And that's another role. So I think in those paradigms, you also want to look at the grandmother one, because there's a number of people I know who are grandparents who are not going on their cruises or their planned retirement holidays and things because they're looking after their grandchildren because nobody else can or they can't afford it. I mean, I can't tell you, I was just horrified at the cost of nursery school fees and how anybody then finds enough job to do on top of that to pay for the nursery school fees is ridiculous. So there are so many grandparents who've now, you know, both men and women who are now full-time around school and things, carers. And that's another role that's added in that you weren't expecting. But so you have to say, I'm very happy with this role because it gives me access to my grandchildren that I wouldn't otherwise have. And I don't do quite as much as everybody else. I only have one at home, one that comes every day. So
It's an interesting perspective because I grew up with my grandparents and spent a lot of time with them. And you've spoken earlier about the
yes,
multi-generational living idea. And I have a strong sort of understanding that the world sometimes creates scenarios to make us recognize what's really important. And if it means that the cost of living means that you have to spend more time with your family and you work ways that bring together these multi-generational, I see so many benefits from being with different people in your family, spending that different time, that unconditional love that you get from grandparents is a very different role that is being played out at a formative age for you. So I do have a strong belief that the universe conspires sometimes to make these things happen. And yeah, you know.
well, if you look at, I mean, again, Cyril's experience being in India quite a lot was that he met with Indians who lived in probably almost arranged marriage situation, but they lived with both sets of parents. And so there was a completely multi-generational area. And I remember him coming back and saying, you know, one of the officers that he'd flown with sort of said, oh, he said, you know, what happens if you have problems with the children or whatever? And he said, oh, somebody in the family will sort it. It's not necessarily the father's job or the mother's job. It could be a grandmother, it could be another child, it could be anybody because they live in that environment. Now, that sounds really perfect environment, and I don't know whether it works out quite as nicely as one would like. But again, it comes back to this point about what sort of society we make for ourselves. So, and how we label it becomes very important, because I wouldn't want to follow that pattern, but I can see the benefits. I could draw out some things from that and not others. And again, maybe what we're talking about is the ability to, you know, come back to your why, is why do they do it that way? And what part of what they do could I benefit from? So just knowing about everybody else's arrangements is quite handy. You can see everything really.
I think it teaches us lots of things. Obviously, more than when you just take it surface level, anything that you're aware of. So let's look at this particular scenario now. When you've got multiple people who are willing to step in and help, you accept help. And
Yeah.
you don't fear asking for help. There's definitely, I know that I spent many years feeling that I was then a failure if I didn't manage what I was doing on my own. And so it was a case of taking on all these extra burdens and feeling that I needed to. But that way of life you know,
Mm.
there may be elements that don't suit the way that we've been brought up, and we may not agree with the arranged marriage element of things, but there are other pieces that we can take and learn from all
Yes.
societies.
Yeah, I think so. You're touching on a lot of things for me about, if you look again, and I did quite a lot of work in, trying to remember the country now, Kenya, where they were setting up business advisors, and I was training them in qualifications for business advising, and they were all such switched on people, wonderful, and they. One guy I worked with, his wife had gone off to America to do a master's in business administration. And he was not only doing this training with us and trying to be a business advisor, but he was also looking after the children. But he said, well, that's normal because his wife needed to get this education. And it was the mental thing about asking for help was that it was perfectly normal to ask for help. So families advise, the idea that we had in England where you made appointments to see a business advisor, you thought it was bonkers. If you needed some business advice, you trot along and ask for it. And if you need some in return, you do the same. And he thought the idea that we were telling them how to set up an interview was hilarious. But again, it's about business. It's about giving back to people. One of the things that concerns me with the volunteers is that we'll sometimes say they report each day how many breakfasts have been done, and we get a little message on there. And sometimes they'll put, we served 88 breakfasts to 88 grateful people. And it makes my teeth cringe. Just the idea that they're grateful. And I go back every now and again and I say, we're not doing this because people are grateful. Because some people might actually be quite angry that they are dependent on free food. And just because they don't show gratefulness, that doesn't mean that they're not valuable people that need to have this food and this company. And so again, that's about helping the volunteers to see how to be really genuinely non-judgmental, which is a very important value, for another one for me, a very important value. But it is interesting to see that people want to be thanked. Again, I'm going back to a book from the very past. You might be able to find it, but it was called The Gift Relationship. And the message, and I first read it when I was in the voluntary sector, was the danger of doing things to people. So I worked in Home Start, which was working with families with children under 5 who were undergoing problems, and training the volunteers not to go into their homes and give to them all the time. Just, I'm here giving you life, advice, support, cuddles, whatever it is. Let them give you something back. Because otherwise you become more and more resentful if you're given to and there's no opportunity. And the great joy for me in the family thing was that, finding out that one of the families that we were supporting, the father at that family went round to the volunteer's house and built some bookshelves for them. So they were able to give back in some way. And I think we need to do that when we're working in the voluntary sector or in any kind of charity, is you've got to enable people to have the opportunity to give back, not to just do at them. Don't make them grateful.
It's interesting because when you said at the beginning, people would say they want to give back to the community, but that was from the volunteer perspective. But you're talking about from the recipient's perspective, which is a different.
Yes. I want to be able to go and help somebody and serve them a breakfast, but I don't want them to be grateful that I've come in and done it. I want to be able to sit down with them and talk through some of the issues they're facing and know that they trust me enough to be able to tell me about some of their problems or difficulties. And that's what all the volunteers do. If we can find a minute or a time, especially with new people coming in, that we will sit with them and chat, and they will slowly open up. And sometimes their problems are something so simple that you could advise them to see the homeless officer, or the drug addiction people could come and help and support them. But it's because they feel confident enough to talk, and that we are giving, we're not just shoveling a plate of food in front of them, but we're actually saying, share with, and they have great experiences and lives, and there, but for the grace of God, it's the choice is there for all of us, and some of us are luckier than others.
And it is just being aware that there is a choice, that there is an ability to turn your life around, and that non-judgmental removal of hierarchical, I'm here to serve you breakfast, therefore I've got my life sorted and you haven't scenario, which is, that's not what we want to happen here. And it could have easily been just one moment or one decision or one life choice that has then sent someone into a different spiral, or it could be of absolutely no fault at all. There's loads of reasons that lots of things happen, and that's just one example. But the whole concept of the relationship, I remember one mum saying to me when the kids were little, Amy, you never ask for help for us to help you. You're always the one that does the pickups and so. And it's not fair. You're being selfish because you're not allowing us to reciprocate. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, fine.
Yeah, that's quite a shock, isn't it, when somebody does that and says that? Yeah. No, it's yes. We all need those kind of wake up calls every now and again too, don't we? That we're actually not perceived as this wonderful super mum after all, and there's something wrong with you because you go and share your issues or problems with other mums. And I think there is a danger that I mean, I'm a very confident person in that I grew up being like that. I mean, I've been criticised more than once for always being sure I knew what we were doing, even when I didn't. And you come across like that, and it's a bit of a wake up call when somebody says, that's not true what you've just told me, and you go, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just trying to make you feel better. So it's so important that we, as we go into each stage of our lives, that we're aware of the needs of others and not to impose on them, but also not to ignore them or walk away.
And I think it is ultimately about designing the retirement and defining what retirement means to you, but really looking at what options there are and how you can separate this identity piece that you've talked about and look at what it is that is going to bring you that fulfillment, and how do you then see that play into different things and creating, as you said, you've got all these wonderful years with all these wonderful transferable skills. There are so many opportunities, and it's exciting. People shouldn't look to retirement as being at the end of the chapter. It's what I've heard today is oh my goodness, the beginning of a chapter. So much so you're actually going to write a whole book about that chapter of your life. Goodness.
Yeah. Yes. It's a good way of describing it like that, and certainly talking to you it clarifies a lot of my thoughts on where we are. And so the first thing I would do is to ban the word retirement. And I think what I would say is that we then say that you reach a certain age where you're expected to do a different kind of work. Or maybe we could have some pattern where it said, I'm learning all these skills here so that I can then move into part 2, where I use those skills to the benefit of my society, my community, my involvement. And so, yes, but I shall have to go away now and invent, isn't it? Shakespeare was there first with his sort of 7 stages of life. Maybe we need more of those kind of, when you work for money. And wouldn't it be wonderful to say to somebody, I don't have to work for money anymore. I'm not, and reassure people that I know this has upset the government because we need more benefits paid, but wouldn't it be lovely if we all got a basic, so I'm very keen on this, basic salary for everybody. So we wouldn't need, all these people that go around checking people's benefits and things. You'd only get a small amount. If you're prepared to live on that, that's fine. If you're not, and most people wouldn't, you get a job that tops onto that, but they don't take away the base like they do at the moment. I mean, one of the biggest issues we've got is that people we had to, with our own people that we employ 2 paid cooks and we employ a services coordinator. And we had to work it to enable them to manage coming out of benefits, because they lose the benefit. Now, if they got the basic salary and then on top of that got what we can pay them, which is not a lot, then it would work out really well. So I should be talking to my MP, not to you.
Well, I see an MP role here. Maybe this is the next phase for you, Charlotte. You're stepping up and making a difference.
I couldn't bear not being liked.
Oh, I think full well that people will judge regardless in life, and it doesn't matter what role you play. People will.
Probably true.
You can't stop them. That's just one of those. Let go of that element, because people will always judge, and you can't control what they think or do. So, but you can control what you think and do.
Yeah. Okay. I will accept that. And I would also say that what you have done with me today is, given me that, it's almost like a coaching session, because you're making me really think deep about what I've been doing. And I actually can't wait now to sort of tackle the next issue now. You've thrown up so many ideas that I've got to now deal with. So can we do this again in a year?
I have had...
And I'll tell you how I get on.
I'd love to review it and see where you are. Charlotte, thank you so much. Where would people go? Would they go to LinkedIn to connect with you? What's the best way?
Best place on LinkedIn, because I stay sane on there. Yeah, that'd be lovely. And I've got other links to things that you could see from LinkedIn, but I do have a presence there. And in fact, I still attract people who ring me up and tell me how they could help me run my business, which is always makes me think, why don't you read the profile first? But I'm very, very willing to be in communication with people on LinkedIn. It's a super platform.
Fabulous. Well, all in the show notes. Connect to Charlotte right now. Charlotte, thank you for taking us on this wonderful journey to the part 2 of your life. I'm very excited to see what continues. How would you like to close out today's episode?
I think really more that I've got more to do than I thought I was going to as a result of this. I was going to say, for me, one of the things that I've certainly learned with being involved in charity is, how lucky we are that we're all one step or one paycheck away from disaster for most people. And so it's keeping that in mind. And I also love, and it's one of my favorite quotations for it, but it's Yeats's thing is, there are no strangers here, just friends you've not yet met. And I feel that is in my life as well. I want to be out there talking to people and communicating with them and being friends, and sharing and learning from each other.
How has this conversation had an impact on you? What value have you received from tuning in? What are your reflections with actions? Please take a moment to leave me an Apple Podcast or Spotify review sharing how Focus on Why has made a difference to you today. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. To keep it going, simply connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook or Twitter, or join the Focus on Why Facebook group. All the links are in the show notes. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.